he used to tell me all the time in this like very, very like concerned way that he was like very concerned for my mental health and that we might need to look into inpatient psychiatric care for me.
Oh, he used to do that. Like, he didn't tell me that, but like, I used to get, you need to go to therapy. You're postpartum. I'm like, I don't know if I have postpartum or you were just gaslighting the shit out of me. Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in today for Thrive Over Survive, where we're here to help you not just live your day to day, surviving the day to day, but eventually thrive in any situation that you might be going through. I'm so excited for my guest today, Junia Judson, who is a great friend and business owner who is the CEO of the Juniatize Project, a public benefit corporation dedicated to empowering domestic violence survivors to gain financial freedom. She's a single mom of 3 special needs kids. She was in an abusive marriage for almost 10 years. She packed up her kids 6 years ago, who at the time they were a lot younger than they are now, and drove over 500 miles to safety. So for the last 6 years, she's been rebuilding their lives and has been out of the, I don't want to mess that up. My assistant will edit that out. I'm just, hold on. Okay. Oh, we're going to pick it back up here, Carolyn. That's for the recording part. In that short time, she's been able to bring, oh shit. Sorry, I should have read this better. I like the way I was reading it. I don't want to give too much of your details away.
Well, I don't even remember what I wrote, so
That's okay. Okay, here we go. I'm going to pick it up here. There we go. She officially started the Juniatize Project this past April, and in a short amount of time, she's been able to bring on 3 other survivors as contractors to provide WordPress, social media, and branding services to domestic violence advocacy organizations and shelters. She's excited that they've come so far so quickly, and I'm so excited to have you here to talk about your journey and to be an inspiration on how you are helping others who are in similar situations for domestic violence. Our missions are very closely aligned. So I'm excited for you to share a little bit more about your journey with us and the viewers to talk about how you left, the struggles kind of that you underwent, and now that you're on the other side. So I'm excited to have you, Junia.
Thanks so much, Emma. I'm so excited to be here and get to share my story and what is happening with the Juniatize Project.
It is a great organization. Junia and I are friends, so I've talked to her about it before. We were connected socially. But do you want to share a little bit for the viewers, kind of what your story was and kind of what finally pushed you to leave your situation? Because I feel like that's something not a lot of people talk enough about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I got married. I was like old when I got married. I was almost 30. And so got married, had my first kid within a year of being married. And things really, I mean, now that I look back, like the only thing he never did was hit me. We
Yeah.
got real close.
Yeah.
We got about the end, we got about here, and he
Yeah.
like, but it really started really early on, like especially I think after my oldest was born,
Right.
that tons of emotional abuse. He was like a gaslighter extraordinaire. Um,
Oh, yeah.
Tons of payback. There was also a lot of sexual abuse. He had a pornography addiction. And I was in a faith setting that said that I just had to stay and take it and to be a good wife and to like that I was fully responsible for his behavior, really.
I
Is
that it's like I hate that so much. Like there was religious abuse in my relationship, but from him, not just like not the church, but the fact that the church, there are people that will tell you, and you're already isolated, you're already in a vulnerable state. So you're just like, what do I do? Of course, I'm going to listen to these people that I think are, from the outside looking and giving me the best perspective, but they are not.
right. And I mean, I think I tell people all the time, the amount of, so I mean, he was very spiritually abusive, like using scripture to like justify his behavior and like all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
But I think I tell people all the time, like the spiritual abuse I received from my spiritual community is actually far worse than anything he ever did to me, which is like saying
Yeah.
something. Um,
Yeah.
because it's just like secondary trauma upon secondary trauma. But yeah, so I met him. We had all our kids like bang bang bang.
Yeah, because they're all
So
very close in age.
yeah, so there's three of them, and the age difference between the youngest and the oldest is 3.5 years, and then there's like a middle one in there.
Yeah, I know that you have 3 kids. I guess the viewers might not know.
Yeah. And so I'm from Colorado. That's where I met him. When my middle son was 6 weeks old, we moved to Arkansas to be residential foster parents. Which like I tell people all the time, like I think we were on crack when we made that decision. Yeah. So I had like
Was this his idea or your idea?
It was kind of both of our ideas. Like he was working in like residential treatments.
Okay.
And he wanted to like keep doing that, but the company that he was with was closing.
Okay.
And like, well, they weren't closing, they were like moving to a different state.
Gotcha.
And we explored going with them, but we were like, it wasn't a good fit.
Right.
So moved to Arkansas, which is like, if you're from Arkansas, like it's lovely. I'm sorry we had a terrible experience. But like the abuse really, really escalated in Arkansas because now we had no community. We were super isolated. We're in this like ridiculously stressful job. Like it was a residential facility that had 5 houses and we were the house parents for one of them. And so we had 8 girls. It had 8 beds in it. And just like complete chaos, right?
Right.
So the job is hard. His behavior really escalates at home. Our apartment is like attached to the house. So you just like never get a break.
Right. That's like being a full-time mom, but on crack.
Right.
But well, like normal families, they have like 3, 4 kids, like at most. Like, and then there's obviously the outliers that have like 8 or 9, but like you're not just dealing with your own kids. So it's completely different.
Right. Well, and I mean, all these girls are traumatized. Like there's a reason they're there, right? They've been removed from their parents. 3 of the girls lived there long term. So like parental rights have been terminated and like that was home. And
you
so
you've something really, really bad for your parental rights to be terminated.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Like I have stories.
Yeah, I mean that's gonna take us down a whole nother rabbit hole, but
well, I know, like we're totally not even just for like confidentiality, like that's not
yeah. But
I mean the trauma. So you've just literally got like trauma upon trauma with these girls. Like I said, I have a 20-month-old and a 6-week-old.
Yeah.
Trying to like figure out how to do this. So the abuse totally escalates. Like long story short, we were there for about a year.
Okay.
And I've actually been like working on this very specific like memory.
Yeah.
That is there. And it's like, and it's not like a specific moment, but it is that like I died, right? Like to keep myself safe, that like my core like identity as a person, I like sort of locked away because I was like, this is too dangerous and like you are not gonna be able to handle this. So we're gonna like, I'm gonna lock you up to keep you safe, even though that feels terrible.
Yeah.
Because it just was that bad, right? So long story short. Oh,
like,
go ahead.
Explain. I'm just curious, like, do you mean like you just kind of like stopped being a part of who you were? Like kind of I'm curious because I feel like I may have done that and I never would have, like, I don't think I ever realized that. Like you just,
yeah. So like, yeah. So I do internal family systems with my counselor. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
Yeah. So it's this whole like counseling modality where it's like there are different parts of you, right? Who like take on different roles. And that all of them like came about to try and protect you in some way, shape, or form in whatever situation you're in. But that you really have this like core personality of like who you are that like doesn't change despite all of these like
Right.
jobs that you take on. And that usually like that core is like, for me, she's like this little 2-year-old who's like in this fortress
Yeah.
because my entire like my family of origin was like super abusive, which I've realized since leaving. um
Yeah.
and I'm like really artsy, I'm really creative, I'm very sensitive, totally like empathic, right? And so it
Yeah.
was not safe even as a kid growing up to be those things. And so I like built this fortress and would like go in there and kind
Mm-hmm.
of come in and out when it was safe, which wasn't a lot.
Right.
but
Right.
um but like in Arkansas made some unconscious decision that like things were so bad that
Yeah.
like that core piece of me wasn't going to be able to handle this or deal with it. And so like really subconsciously like locked her in that fortress that I had built.
I'm so intrigued by this whole, like, I'm gonna look this up after we get off the call because I want to know more about this mode, like therapy. What I guess that's what you call it. But I'm very curious about this now.
Yeah.
This is super, like, I feel like a lot of people probably aren't aware of this who have dealt with trauma. So this is perfect
Yeah.
for anyone watching.
Yeah. And so, and then I also have a friend that she does neuro-linguistic programming.
Right.
And so the memory, like she and I did an NLP session about something
Love it.
else, and like that like memory in Arkansas kept coming up like afterwards, and I was like, what is going on with this?
Yeah.
And so like worked through it and like totally realized that that was because it literally like in that memory it's like I died,
Oh my
and I was like, whoa, this is like this is like
Yeah.
serious stuff, right?
Yeah.
um
I'm yet to do an NLP like session. I want to. I know a lot of people who practice. Um, but I've done a lot of RTT. I think those are really like cool and
what's
fun.
RTT? I don't know what that is.
So it's rapid transformation therapy. And that's
Okay.
kind of like what helped me get over my visibility block. Because before we
Mm,
started recording, Junia and I were talking about as trauma survivors and like domestic violence survivors, it's hard for us to put ourselves out there and build our business because of the fear and the trauma that we've gone through um, with our abusers. And we have fear. I know I had fears of putting myself out there, being successful, and there being this backlash, or if I got too big, he would take notice and then come back. And, I was just keeping myself really small. So I did rapid transformation therapy to address a lot of this and like get over it quickly. So it's basically you go into a meditative state, probably similar to NLP, and you tap into these unconscious or subconscious blocks and memories. And then they use meditation slash recordings that you listen to for a month straight to like rewire your brain.
interesting.
Yeah. I love them. I did a
So
money one
interesting.
recently and it like unlocked so many things that I didn't even think were contributing to my money blocks or like my feeling of unworthiness that I was like, whoa.
Right? Well, and
Yeah.
I'm like, the brain is like so fascinating because
Right.
like especially NLP is like so weird because she's like picture, like get the picture in your head. She's
Yeah.
like asking me all these questions about it, right? And then she's like, put it really small, like down in this corner. Think
Yeah.
of a really happy memory, like get in
Yeah.
there, fold up the bad one, and like put it
Right.
away. And you're like, why does this work? Like,
Yeah. It doesn't make sense, but it does after you've done it. Like it's
right.
hard to explain until you've gone through one and then you're like, I love it. Like it's amazing.
Right. Well, and now, like, I don't know if I'm supposed to do this, but like, I feel like I can do them on my own now. And like,
Right.
oh, this memory is like really bothering me. Because that's actually what happened with the one in Arkansas, that I'd done another one with my friend.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, this one keeps coming up. Like, let's just deal with it.
Yeah.
And it was actually really interesting because like the first one I did, I like put it in a box, like put the
Right.
memory in a box and like put it on a shelf. But this one
Mhm.
in Arkansas, I was like, this thing needs a funeral.
Yeah.
because it's so like there's just so much like death and destruction in here. Like it needs to be mourned. This moment needs to be
Right.
mourned, and we need to like have a funeral. So it's
And then
just
you need to
so
have a
interesting.
party for yourself to come back. You need to have your own party, I think.
Ooh, that's cool.
I
I
think
like that.
that's
I like that.
fun. So, but I know we're going down another rabbit hole with NLP and RTT, but so you had the memory or you're working through the memory and that's leading to your healing.
Yeah. Yeah. So we, super long story short about Arkansas, like we end up down there with no jobs. And it's like rural Arkansas. Like it's closer to it's closer to Mississippi and Louisiana than it is to
Okay.
like the rest of Arkansas.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so we ended up in Nebraska, which is where my ex is from, and he like
Okay.
always wanted to go home. And so this was like sort of this perfect, like, hey, we Denver's too expensive. We can't move back there, which is totally not true, but whatever.
Yeah. They just want to get you with
And
like their people.
right.
Mm-hmm.
And isolate me even further, right? Like I literally know no one. So we get to Nebraska.
Yeah.
It's a smaller town. Like, I mean, it's a small city.
Okay.
But he knows everybody, right? We go back to the church that he went to in high school and college.
Yep.
Everybody loves him. He was
Yep.
like a leader in the youth group and the this and the that and Young Life and all the things, right? So we moved back in 2012. No, sorry. In 2011. We moved there. I didn't move back.
Yeah.
I'm there in 2011. And again, like things really escalate. We lived with his parents for a little while. I'm pregnant with our third at this point, and I'm
Right.
just like, oh my gosh, I just got fired. Like, because I got fired. Like, it's a really long story, but whatever. He gets a job. I'm home with these two little kids. I'm like 5 months pregnant. I'm sure I had like serious depression from like everything that happened in Arkansas. We're living
Right.
with his parents.
That's not going to make it any better. Never,
No.
never, ever. Like that happened to my parents. Like they moved in with my dad's family, like my dad's mom. And like that is one core thing that I will never let happen in my marriage is like, we will never move in with either parent. I'm like, no.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that maybe if you are like, all of you are healthy, like emotionally, like maybe you can make it work. It's going to be a real challenge.
Right.
But this was definitely not a healthy situation.
No. Right. You're adding more trauma on top of your already, and when you're pregnant, like nothing is normal anyway. Your body's not normal. You don't feel normal and you're just stressed, tired, and feel like crap.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like super sick for like all my pregnancies. So it's literally just like, oh, how completely miserable can I be?
Yeah.
Yeah. So things really escalate. Like it's so interesting now because we moved to this other real small town so that my ex could go to college.
Okay.
Because like all he had was a high school degree.
Okay.
So we move over there. He gets a job in the town. Things start getting like really, really bad in terms of just all the like, emotional abuse and the verbal abuse and the like sexual coercion, like all of it, right?
Right.
To the point, and it's interesting because I used to be so embarrassed about this because I was like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking, right? To the point where I'm like, something is not right here. And I'm like a weird researcher. Like I'm just always like, why, like super why person, right?
Yeah.
So I like it's this really old, like scuzzy fourplex. Like there's cockroaches in the fridge. Yeah. And the landlord's like, we don't have a bug problem.
Oh man.
You're like, I'm sorry. Whatever. There's cockroaches like living in the fridge. So what was I gonna say? Oh, so I like somehow in my research, this is like a cautionary tale of like internet diagnoses or whatever, right?
Okay.
That I somehow am like, oh my gosh, maybe we have carbon monoxide poisoning because we have this really old furnace, and I'm reading that like, you can have a crack in the furnace and you can have like a carbon monoxide leak, and like these are the behaviors that you see, like
Oh
increased
my
aggression,
God.
like all these things, like basically like everything that my ex is doing.
So you were just like, "Oh, he's just not in his right mind."
Well, so what I do is I like talk to him about it and he's like, whatever, I don't. And so I end up going to the ER at like 10 o'clock at night, being like, I think we might have carbon monoxide poisoning. So they do like this thing where they like puncture your arm to like get
Yeah,
like a whatever
sample.
reading. And then they're like, if you're so concerned about this, where are your children? And I was like, oh. And like I am so lucky that they did not send CPS to our house. Like,
Yeah. Oh, because 'cause you're just like, you probably were you didn't
yeah, like this is how like not straight I'm thinking, right? Because
yeah,
things are just so bad.
yeah. I know that
Yeah.
feeling because, like, whenever everything should hit the fan for my situation, I literally had to make the split-second decision of, do I try and take my daughter or do I leave her here? Because I didn't wanna anger him more, but I didn't wanna leave her because I was like, "What if she doesn't I don't get her back?" Like, and you have to make these calls and, like, hindsight 2020 for everything, like, there's so many things I look back on and be like, I wish I would have done this, but, you just don't you can't think clearly in that state of like, or
Oh
in that
yeah.
state.
Right. Well, and I like also one of his favorite things, he used to tell me all the time in this like very, very like concerned way, that he was like very concerned for my mental health and that we might need to look into inpatient psychiatric care for me.
Oh, he used to do that he didn't tell me that, but, like, I used to get, "You need to go to therapy. You're postpartum." I'm like, "I don't know if I have postpartum or you were just gaslighting the shit out of me." Like,
Right?
right.
You're
Like,
like,
once
oh, I
you
probably do need some psychiatric care because you're making me crazy.
yeah, exactly. I don't know if it's you don't probably didn't need inpatient, but that's
Right?
wild.
Yeah. And I mean, he told me once, like, when I was pregnant, that like if I didn't get my like mental health under control, that he would have to consider divorcing me.
Oh my god.
I'm pretty sure he like if he ever sees this, he will like deny that till the cows come home, but like it
Yeah,
got said.
it
So
got
yeah, like obviously I'm in a place where I'm not thinking straight, like am
yeah,
trying to find any reason for this behavior that's happening, for like what's happening in our family.
right.
And so we end up moving back to the larger town where
Okay.
he's from. Um, and things just keep like, and at this point, like our kids, my older two are old enough that again, we come from this faith community that says that the only way to discipline your children is to spank them. So then with my older two, we have like physical abuse involved because he would spank them
Yeah.
totally angry. And then, like, whatever they did, right? Like, you may not talk back. He would spank them on every syllable of the sentence. And then, depending on how angry he was, he could say the sentence between 3 and 10 times. Right. And, like, I'm still in this, like, theological place where I like think that this is the only way to do it. So do I stop him? No. Um, and so there we've got that piece going on. So like my kids, especially the older two, like despite their special needs, have all this trauma.
Right.
Um, and that in and of itself is a huge challenge. Um,
Are you no I'm just curious because you're no contact because you like left the state.
no, they go to him every other weekend.
Oh my gosh. And
Yeah. And I'm actually realizing how like he's not like caught like this whole like throwing around diagnoses thing, like he's not a narcissist. He actually didn't fight me on anything.
Yeah.
We like managed to do mediation. It was not a high conflict divorce, but I really realized that like he I mean, he's obviously super manipulative. Like
Right.
he's also 6'2" and like 300 pounds. And I'm 5'5". And so physical intimidation went a long way,
Right.
right? Isolation and
Yeah.
physical intimidation went a long way.
Yeah.
Because now, like, I stand up to him and I'm like, well, he didn't even do anything,
Right.
right? So we actually did mediation, and like, I'm like, man, if I knew then what I know now, right, I would have done things very differently. I would have asked for different things. There would be things in the parenting plan that would
Mm.
not be in there. Like, I'm not allowed to move more than 50 miles away from him without his permission.
That's like most states. Like in our state, it sucks because like my abuser left for like almost 2 years and didn't have to file anything. But I also just want him to go away. But like if me and Zach want to move now, we need his permission because she lives with us predominantly, which
Right.
is bullshit.
Right. Yeah. And like, so because we did mediation,
Hmm.
like I said, he has them every other weekend.
Okay.
For like they go on right now, they go on like Sunday after the Saturday afternoon and they come back Monday afternoon. I'm actually really our case, I think, is sort of unusual because we did manage to get through mediation. And I'm really thankful for that because in Colorado, evidently Colorado was a very 50-50 state. And if it had gone to trial, like it would not. I mean, I did the math once and I had them like 93% of the time or something.
Yeah.
Um, so that's not how it would have turned out if it had gone to trial. And I'm very, very thankful that it didn't.
Yeah.
Because we're at a point now where my oldest only goes once a month.
Right. I was gonna
Um,
say they're older now. They can probably decide if they want to go or not.
yeah, we're getting to that point. So yeah, so have that going on. But it really like so my youngest is born in 2012, and I feel like when after she was born, things really start to like escalate in a different way. Like we start getting into him almost being physically violent.
Right.
Um, and I'm obviously like not doing well,
Yeah.
right? And so I think it's always such a weird story, and like especially like
Yeah.
wherever people are like in their faith journeys or like whatever, right? That this is where so much of the church trauma comes in. That there was
Right.
like this whole thing. We were at church and he was being like super abusive like during the worship service, right? Like this thing happens with the kids and he's like super angry with me, and like we come back into worship and I'm like almost hysterical, like trying not to cry, right? Because this whole
Yeah.
thing like just happened out in the lobby. um
Yeah.
and like I think to myself, this is not right.
Yeah.
Like we're in church, for crying out loud. Like this is not how this thing is supposed to be.
Right.
And I hear a voice that says he's abusing you. And I literally like we're in the middle of worship and I literally like look behind me like, are you talking to me? And I was like, oh, there's nobody back there.
You just like you had that like gut
Like
moment.
whether it was
Yeah.
God or like myself or like whatever,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh, okay, like what am I supposed to do with this,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so went home and ironically, I would not recommend this to anybody. Um, Searched for verbal abuse on Focus on the Family's website.
Okay.
Um, and and I say I wouldn't recommend that because Focus on the Family is very like save the marriage. Like on the front end, yes, you can get like, I was like, yes, check. Like they have this like checklist of like verbal abuse, you know, emotional and verbal abuse. And I was like, check. But then if you actually if you like called a pastor or something, they're totally going to give you the, like, you just need to try harder, submit more, have more sex, like all that stuff. So don't call their pastors.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So then end up connecting with a friend from right out of college. That I was in and like a Bible translation organization. And so she like posts something on Facebook that like leads me to get in touch with her because I was like, she might know what's happening or understand this. And so get into contact with her, I like sort of tell her what's going on, and she's like, you like need to get out of there. Gets me a copy of Why Does He Do That, Lundy Bancroft's book. If you're, I don't know if you're familiar with that
I'm
book.
not.
Yes. Like if you want to do like a little resource highlight or something in the show notes, like
we will definitely be
like if you're confused about your situation or like are wondering if it's abuse, like go get Lundy Bancroft's Why Does He Do That?
Yeah.
And so Lundy is like kind of the like secular expert inside of the domestic violence field. He worked in batter intervention for like 15 years or something.
Okay.
So he's actually like working with the men who are abusers. And this is like, he like wrote this book out of like 15 years of like working with them, of like, here's all their behaviors. Like they basically have a toolkit and they like pick their favorite ones,
Right.
but they use all the same behaviors. And so like read this book. And I was literally like, I mean, I read it in a night and I was like, how does this guy know what is happening in my bed, in my car, in my kitchen? Like, oh my gosh, this is terrifying.
I have one that I always recommend when I'm on podcasts. My therapist made me read it, and it was oh my gosh, I always recommend it and I always forget the name, but it was so good. But it's like, it's specifically for narcissists. And it was like everything, like when you the falling for everything, the gaslighting, like they use they basically, I don't know if they know that they're doing it, but they do it where they like tear you down and then they chemically in your brain fill you up with serotonin and all the chemicals, so then you're chemically addicted to them in that sense. But like, it was actually written from a man's perspective. Not perspective, but the author's a man, and he was in an abusive relationship with a narcissistic male. So I'll link that in the show notes as well. I have a copy in my Amazon like account. Sorry, but yeah, that was also a good one for if you're dealing with narcissists. Like, it's just like, how did they know exactly what happened in my relationship? Yeah.
Like it's a little, I mean, it really is like surreal, right? And like, the thing I remember is like, he just says over and over again, like, things never get better, they only escalate.
Yeah,
and I was like,
I heard a lot growing up because my aunt was in an abusive relationship, and like they'd split up around the time we were in high school. So like we remember a lot of it, but yeah, it just got to the point of like, it just got so worse, and it's every time. Yeah.
Right. And so like, because I am in this faith community, my solution is to like reach out to church leadership. And the first church, they basically do nothing. Like they didn't have a pastor at the time.
Yeah.
So like I reach out to this elder and his wife, and like we meet a few times, and she like watched my kids because I was drowning. I had, you know, I have a 1, a 3, and a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
And all like, and I was like nearly catatonic. Like there was a while where like, you know, my poor oldest is having to like basically take care of the other two because I'm just like, what is happening, you know?
Your whole nervous system is insane. I'm gonna have to send you the episode that I did with another friend, Casey, but we talk all about like just your body being, and when you're feeling those things, like you're not safe, your basic needs are not being met, and you can't think clearly.
Yeah. yeah. So then I'm getting told from, the elder and his wife that like I chose to marry him. Like basically like you made your bed, you have to lay in it.
You don't.
Divorce is not an option. Like you have to stay together. How else are you going to resolve it if you're not together? So we finally like I keep asking like we need to go somewhere else. Like we need some help that we can't get here. He's like
Right.
not willing to leave until he finally has like a theological difference with one of the elders, and then he's willing to leave. Um, so I know. So we go to a different church where it's actually the pastor that left that first church. Like he left and started his own church. But like my ex totally knows him. He was like the pastor when my ex was there in high school and college, right? It's a little church plant, and we totally get the same thing. But like we did a year of basically like a year of well, probably 6 months of like marriage counseling with the pastor and his wife.
Yeah.
Which is the other thing, like marriage counseling does not work.
I think it works if you have like a normal person.
Well, yeah, so I'm saying like if there's any even like a hint of abuse,
It does.
like marriage counseling doesn't work.
Or if they're really good at being manipulative. My abuser, we went to 2 sessions. We weren't married. We went to couples counseling because obviously we had a child. If the child wasn't involved, I would have been gone like a long time ago. So if anyone's watching and you feel like you have abuse, go before there's a child involved. Please, please, please. But he convinced our therapist that I was postpartum and that everything was my fault and we didn't need to go to couples counseling, even though he had slapped me across the face and was going to strand me in Ohio. In Cleveland, which makes it worse. Like in downtown Cleveland, he was like threatening to leave me. Well, take my car. He was going to take my car.
Right.
And leave me.
Right.
So,
yeah. So yes, it's like this always gets used to manipulate and like make you look crazy, right?
You're the crazy one. Yep.
Yeah. So we do that for 6 months, and then they're like, oh, you guys are doing so well, like, and then there's this whole thing about like he's repented, he said he's sorry, like he's not screaming and yelling at you anymore. So like, why can't you just like move on? And I'm like, because all the covert stuff is still happening.
Yeah.
Right. Like the stuff you can't see and isn't super obvious and is so hard to like explain.
Right.
And so we do that. There's just, so finally in April, well, I found a counselor in like March of 2016 who she was a pastor at a different church, and I was like, I need something, right? Like say to my ex, like, I need something. And he's like, whatever, I guess if you want to go do that. And so like the first session, and like now that I know about trauma, I'm like, she's amazing counselor, and like she helped me with so much stuff. But like that first session, like I literally was like, here's everything that's happening. I'm like sitting on her couch, like free. My trauma response is like I get super, super cold and I just start shaking like crazy, right? I know this now.
I like freeze. I just freeze. And I'm like part freeze, part faint. Like I'll just be like, I gotta go to bed.
Yeah. Well, and so like, story of what's happening as I'm like freezing cold and shaking.
Yeah.
And just thinking like, what is wrong with me? Like, what is happening? But she's the first person that she's like, this is not okay. It's not in your head. You're not crazy. And I was like, oh, okay.
Right.
And so she and I joke all the time. The counselor and I would joke that like I went to 2 sessions with her and then I left. Cause I was like, wait a minute, like this is not okay. The only place I have any support is back in Colorado. And I've been saying for like 2 years since I realized what was happening, like I need support. We need to go back to Colorado. So like literally every 6 months, he would like things would get a little better. but then they get worse again. And I'd be like, I need to go back to Colorado. And so he'd like shape up a little bit and then like, you know, get a little better.
Yeah.
And so I was finally just like, I'm leaving. And so I came home from my one session and I was like, school's done in 5 weeks. Cause at this point, my middle was in preschool and my oldest was, I think that was the year she was redoing kindergarten. I was like, school ends in 5 weeks. I am taking the kids and we are going back to Colorado when school is done.
You told
And
him
so
this, or
he
you
comes,
decided?
I told him that.
Okay.
Well, I decided and I told him this, which like,
Okay.
you know, because
Some
I'm
people
still in
just
the
don't
like everything
say.
has to be above board and like,
Yeah.
right. I mean, again, you know, if I knew then what I know now, like I would not have told him, I would not have done a lot of the things that I did, right?
Yeah.
And thankfully, like it didn't get violent. He was not, you know, but I think like for listeners, like things can get really violent really quickly. And if you are trying to leave, like to know, really have a safety plan because things can go sideways like so fast.
Yep.
And don't be all, even though you might feel like you're supposed to tell them everything, like don't, because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how he's going to handle it.
Nope.
And that like whatever the statistic is, like most homicides inside of domestic violence situations happen when the survivor is trying to leave.
Yep.
So like, yeah. So tell him that he comes home from, I told him that like, you know, in the evening, whatever, like came back to my counseling session, like tell him this. He comes home from work the next day and is like, I've been having suicidal thoughts all day at work. And I was like, I'm sure you were, because there's like mental health issues. There's extreme mental health issues now that I realize are like unresolved, like whatever.
Right.
Going all the way back to his childhood, right? Like in his childhood, that I'm like, yeah, I think you probably are serious. I think you have been having those thoughts all day long.
Right.
I'm done. And that was literally my like, I'm done. I'm not doing anymore. I'm not caring for you. Like you with this, but like we're leaving. I own that.
Right.
And so
1 second. Hold on. Okay.
Okay. So yeah, he comes home, says he is suicidal, and I'm sure that he was, but like that was like my moment. Like I feel like I've talked to other survivors who have left and you just have like this moment where you're like, no more, right? Like I'm not carrying this for you. I'm not doing this. We're leaving. Like, and I didn't tell him any of that. And I was supposed to go to like a MOPS thing at a local church that night, and he was gonna watch the kids, I think. But instead, I told him to like go hang out at the pastor's house and that I would take the kids to the MOPS thing because there was childcare. Instead, I called my sister and like I'd been planning, like I'd been looking at shelters and like because I knew that when I came back to Colorado, like I didn't really have anywhere to stay.
Yeah.
And so I've been looking at shelters, have been looking just like sort of gathering resources for, you know, what I thought would be 5 weeks out. Call my sister and I'm like, okay, like buy a plane ticket to Omaha. We'll pick you up tonight or like tomorrow morning or whatever, like in Omaha, so you can help me drive back. So she does that. She like gets like an emergency ticket like to Omaha. I like spend an hour or two where like my ex thinks I'm at the MOPS meeting, like packing up what we can fit in the minivan.
Right. You got to just take what you can.
Yeah. Like each of the kids gets like a stuffy and their favorite stuffy and their favorite toy, you know. Some clothing.
Things can be replaced. Like that was so hard for me when I was leaving, but like my mom just said like, we will buy you whatever you need, like just leave it. You know, like you can, material stuff can be bought again. Like don't worry.
Right. and that yeah, so pack up as much as we can fit in the minivan. I actually ended up going over to the MOPS meeting to like say goodbye to everybody. And like, and nobody knows what's going on, right? Because at this point, I really don't have any friends. Like, God bless rural Nebraska. People were like, no, I have enough friends. Like, I don't really need any more friends. Like, good luck. Yeah. So I would like go to these church events just because I was so like desperate for any sort of like human interaction, right?
Yeah.
So end up like I'm obviously upset. And so the one pastor's wife is like, what's going on? So I like tell her, and she's like, oh, like by Nebraska law, you need to call the police because he said he would hurt himself. And I was like, oh, that's a thing here. And she's like, yeah. So I end up calling the police, and basically like my husband said this, we have guns in the house, because we had guns in the house because it's Nebraska. So I think he must have been home by then. So the police go over, get all the guns, like tell him what I said. They get all the guns. The pastor comes over, takes all the guns. And then I'm like feeling bad, right? So I'm like, can I talk to him? Like I asked the police officer, like, can I talk to him while you guys are there to tell him that we're leaving? So that if he gets more self-harming, then you guys are there, and the police officer is like, yeah, that's fine. So I like tell him like we're leaving on the phone. And of course he's like, like completely distraught and like, I don't understand what I do wrong. And like all the things, like he still tells my kids that he has no idea why I left. And you're like, yeah.
There's been a bunch of lead up.
Right? Like this has been a 2.5-year process of me being like, this is not okay. Your behavior is unacceptable. I can't do this. We need to leave, like whatever. But he still doesn't know why I left.
Does your kids, now that they're older, do they understand, or have you not had that conversation with them?
My oldest does, but she is like super smart, like is the kid who like, you can't say anything about presents or anything because she's like, you're like, it's purple. And she's like, oh, you got me a whatever. And you're like, how did you do that?
Yeah.
And so she remembers, and she has memories of like coming, like getting up in the night to like get a drink or whatever. And the two of us are out there. And it's interesting because when she would talk about it at first, she was like, and you and daddy were fighting. And then she was like, well, and she's saying this when she's like 7 or 8, right? That she's like, well, you weren't really fighting. Daddy was yelling at you when you were crying.
That's crazy.
And I'm like, that would be accurate. So she's like, she does really get confused about like I haven't always been a great mom, right? Like I was really angry for a really long time after we left. And just because I was like so overwhelmed, right? Like I'm in all this trauma, having to rebuild our lives. We have zero support network, like, and I've got these 3 special needs kids who are just really overwhelming, right?
Right.
Then for a really long time. And I can appreciate that it feels really confusing. Especially when you have your dad over here saying like, she just left and I don't know why. Now that she's older, we have more conversations about it. So my middle, because he is high functioning autistic, I think it's like he just sort of doesn't get it. He just knows that like we're even at this point where like he just turned 12 and he doesn't want to go to his dad's anymore, but he can't articulate why. Whereas my 12-year-old or my 13-year-old was literally like, because of this and this and this and this. I mean, like the girl needs to be a lawyer because she could like get Al Capone out of prison.
So like they don't have like the best relationship then with him.
my older two don't. My youngest like loves him and asks all the time like why we can't be together and why we can't like be married and why don't you like daddy, and daddy's so sad and he misses you. And
Right.
but she was 3 when we left. Like
Right.
she doesn't remember anything, whereas the
Yeah.
other two were 5 and 7,
Right.
and so they remember a lot more. um and she's just daddy's little girl, and so all she's ever seen is that whole like Disneyland dad thing where,
Yeah.
yeah. So
I mean, I know that feeling because when I left, my daughter was 1, less than 1, but then she doesn't associate her biological dad with as being dad because he did leave.
mm,
So, like, we're in, like, a weird situation. I also like talking about this because I feel like viewers, they are, like, wondering all these questions, like, how do they have these conversations with their children? Like,
right,
you're put in these weird situations. There's not much on the internet other than, like, basic, normal divorce conversations to have with your
right,
children. Like, they don't talk about,
right,
what do you do and how do you approach the subject of, the other parent was abusive, and it's not a normal, like, there was something we just couldn't get past. Like like they don't have those. So it's hard.
right,
And there's always unique situations because like in my situation, she doesn't, everyone's like, oh, you need to have time with your dad. And she doesn't, she's like, but I live with my dad. Like in
right,
her mind is Zach's always been here since she can remember. And we've lived together since the beginning of the pandemic. And that's her dad. Like her biological dad never like he didn't show up for visits for like over a year
right,
kind of things.
right.
So I just think it's interesting and I always like to hear other people's perspective on like how do you handle these situations and like, you know, lessons learned from parenting because it is hard conversations you have to have.
My gosh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think,
And
and I
each
really
is
think,
different.
especially with my oldest, because she is so like self-aware and she's just sort of so like intuitive,
Yeah.
her, I've been like, what do you remember?
Mm-hmm.
Like your memories are your memories, because he's totally tried to gaslight her and say that I'm saying these things and that I'm like making him look bad. And I'm like, what do you remember? Because your
Yeah.
memories are yours. I can't tell you you don't remember it that way. Dad can't tell you you remember it that way. Like,
Right.
you know what you know. And
Right.
so trust your own memories, regardless of honestly what either of us say.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, and it's gonna, I don't really know how I'm gonna handle it with my son,
Mm-hmm.
because like I said, he's far less articulate about it
Right.
than my daughter is, and he just knows that he doesn't like going.
Right. I didn't know if
um
that like if you've seen any signs like towards the kid. I don't know because like every situation's different. Sometimes it's just the partner, sometimes like it transcends like the children become the next person that they like target.
well, and I mean, I really really worry about my youngest,
Mhm.
um because she does, like, she can do no wrong, he can do no wrong, and like, there's pieces of it that like I won't go into, but they just feel like really icky, and like I really worry about her if if we get to a point where both of the older ones don't want to go,
What's
and
going to
like
happen when they're
they're
not
old enough to make that decision, like I really really worry about her.
there?
um but I'm like, well, we're not there yet, so
Yeah, that's one of the things that I'm struggling with is like worrying about things that aren't even happening yet. And I think a lot of survivors do that. Like it's hard not to let your mind go like what if they do this, what if they do this, because you're put in that situation for so long. Like what if I do this, are they going to do X, Y, and Z? And you kind of have to mentally prep for worst case scenario because that's
right,
what you've dealt with for so long.
right. Well,
Yeah.
and I think knowing that like part of trauma is catastrophizing, right? That
Yeah.
like the worst actually, and with us, like the worst actually did happen. So it's like not that you're making stuff up, that you're literally like, this thing happened and I don't want it to happen again. Like,
I have that right now too. We're dealing with that too. Like he took her and now the courts are giving him unsupervised time again. And I'm like, all he
Oh,
did was run away to a
I'm
different state and just let
sorry.
time pass. Like you can't tell me like that made it any better because now there's no address on file. No one can find him. No one can contact him. Like it's like easier for him. And like for some like
Right.
when you have people like that, they're not mentally stable. Like you never know what's going to set them off
Right.
and you
Right.
don't know what they're going to do. And a lot of people like have to like you got like what you said catastrophize, but like I still do it sometimes.
Oh yeah. And I mean, I think like being kind to ourselves, right? Like knowing, like I think for me it was so helpful to like realize that it is a trauma response.
Mhm.
And that like, of course I'm doing that because
Right.
the thing happened. I don't want it to happen again.
Yeah.
And like really just learning, I think, to be kind to myself, right? The like, this is just hard.
Yeah.
And there are no good answers. There's no easy solutions.
No.
And that you really just like do the best you can, forgive yourself. Like with my kids, like ask my kids to forgive me. Like, really, we're all doing the best we can.
Yeah.
And y'all are totally going to need therapy because of me when you're adults, but like, fine, I'll pay for it. Like,
Yeah. Well, that and it's like hindsight's always 2020. You didn't know. You are who you are because of what you went through. And like we want to put our kids in these protective bubbles and we can't.
right.
And then like I don't know about you, but I beat myself up all the time. I'm like, my daughter has to go through this because of my choices. You know, like the guilt just weighs on me.
Right. And I think like that's where internal family systems is really helpful because they're like one of those is their critic, right?
Yeah.
And that like people, my like really close friends laugh at me all the time because I talk all the time about being like literally I like have conversations with my like parts all the time now that you're like, okay, critic, I understand that this is like super scary and like being really mean to me is like how you actually kept me safe, which like seems
Mm,
like, you know,
yeah.
whatever the phrases I'm looking for, like counterintuitive or like,
Right.
unhelpful.
I get what
But
you're
that
saying
like,
though.
yeah, that like, and so I'll literally be like, okay, you don't get to run the meeting. Here's a cookie and like go take a nap.
Yeah. I
And that
really love
like,
that. Like you
yeah,
kind of have
like,
to address all
and
of them.
right. And that like, I understand that you're trying to keep me safe.
Mhm.
Thank you for trying to keep me safe, but we're not in that same situation anymore. So like, like really you don't get to run the meeting, so here's
Mm.
a cookie, sit down, I'll take care of it.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
That's like
there's
such good awareness too. Like which I that's why I love having this platform is to help people find different ways to like help cope because
right.
talk therapy or normal traditional therapy sometimes doesn't always help. And like we talked about NLP and then can you repeat it one more time? I'm like the name of
Yeah, it's internal family systems.
internal family systems because that sounds like it's very helpful.
Yeah, yes, and you end up talking to yourself a lot.
I
Like
do.
I talk to myself anyway, so what's the difference? Now it's like constructive internal conversations.
Gotcha.
um so yeah, so we, long story short, meet him stay at a friend's house, meet him in a gas station the next morning to like say goodbye
Oh,
and like load up in the van, drive down to Omaha, get my sister,
yeah.
and then like drive the 500 miles back to Colorado in like this, like it rained on I-80 the entire time. And it was like snowing. It's so funny. It was April 16th, right? Like that's my like
Yeah, your date.
um my date. It was snowing in Colorado on April 16th.
Oh my.
And raining to beat the band all the way through Nebraska. And my sister drove the whole way. Like, God bless my sister. She drove the whole way, and it was like I'm like sobbing and like practically like catatonic in the passenger seat, right? As
Yeah.
we're like going by these, like every time we go by a semi, like she can't see anything for like several seconds. And you're just like, if we get home without dying, like this is gonna be amazing.
Yeah.
And so stay with her. We finally get to Colorado, stay at her house the one night. And then like I called the shelter, the largest, where my sister lives, the largest shelter, women's shelter in Colorado is like 20 minutes away.
Right.
So had already called the shelter, was like, this is my situation. Lots of shelters, they don't have enough capacity. And so you only can go if there's physical violence.
Right.
Thankfully, this one is not the case. It's Crossroads in Fort Collins.
Okay.
They're actually a really interesting shelter because they have a few rooms for men that are like separated off from like the main area.
Yeah, I've seen a couple like that because you have to separate them because of the trauma piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they also have a like pet fostering program.
That is, I've seen that
too.
There's like a program specifically near us that will come and help rescue your dog or your pets if you're leaving that kind of situation.
Yeah, because so many people, I mean, I've talked to multiple people who like they didn't leave because of their pets. Because
I love my pets now. Like we have pets. I didn't have pets then. Like, but I don't think I would have stayed for a pet.
Right.
Or like just I would have taken them with me if I could, but
yeah, but I mean, I think like that some people, their pets really are just like their children and they can't. And I think like, if you're in a situation where like your pet is very, very important to you and like that he'll kill it or something.
Yeah, that's true.
Like if you've got that going on, like I can understand why you don't leave.
Yeah.
If they feel like your kids and
and if you don't have like the money to take care of them, or like you're not sure where you're going, so some places don't even allow pets, like hard.
So Crossroads, they have a pet program. Nice. So we stayed there for 2 months and I'm like literally every waking moment is trying to find housing. Right, because Colorado, and like before the whole like pandemic housing craziness, Colorado was already really really expensive.
Right.
And like my family, like my dad was not in a place where he could help me. And so I'm like desperately applying for like any piece of housing you could ever find, like all the Section 8 housing, all of the like anything, and like remember the first time I went into a project-based Section 8 to apply, and she was like, it's a 2 to 3 year waiting period. Do you still want to apply? And I was like, yeah, I guess so, because what else am I gonna do?
What good is that gonna do you though?
Well, because it's better to be on, and I would say this to anybody, right? Like it is better to do all that legwork and to be on the list because you really don't know what's going to happen. Like, because they contact people and like you could have 20 people that they can't get a hold of. And so they just move to the next person on the list.
That's
so
true.
Your 2-year waiting could turn into 6 months because they can't find, 80% of the people who are on the list. Almost like throwing up when she said that. Because I was literally like, I don't know where we're gonna go after these 2 months. Like, oh no. And so thankfully my sister and her now ex-husband had just moved into like this nice big house, and my sister was like, you can come live with us for as long as you need to like get yourself back on your feet. So we lived with them for 3 months, and I ended up getting some government funding. And this is a good resource for people. It's WIOA.
Okay.
I don't remember what it stands for. It's WIOA. And it's like funds to go back to school to get training, especially if it's like in a high demand field.
Okay.
And especially for survivors who've been home and were homemakers,
Right.
there is a category that you can apply as a displaced homemaker
Okay.
that like nobody knows about. Oh, there's like tons of funds to be able to with this WIOA money. And so you can contact your local workforce,
Okay.
like the county workforce office, and ask them about WIOA funding.
That's really good to know. So is that like kind of how you got started into getting into the Juniatize Project? Kind of what led to you
Yeah.
starting
So
your
with
business now? Because that's kind of
yeah,
what
so
ultimately got you out of that financial struggle.
yeah, so I use that WIOA funding to do a full stack web development course.
Okay.
I honestly was like still so like in trauma that I didn't get a lot from it, but
Oh no. I'll go to breakfast.
Sorry, I have a kid who's like, we were supposed to be able to get my son who was like freaking out earlier
Right.
about like, you said 10 o'clock, we're supposed to be able to be on the internet. Um so I told him to go to my dad's house because he lives like half a block away.
Oh my
um yeah. um yeah, so like really struggled to get back into the workforce. Like I do this coding boot camp, but I'm still just so like shell shocked that I don't even like remember. I can't even like retain half of what I'm learning.
Mm-hmm.
Um and so really just sort of like, I mean, really for like the last 5 years, we like survived on public assistance and child support.
Right.
I had been home for 9 years with my kids, even though like I have a master's degree, I have a teaching license. I did a little bit of subbing, but realized it was like super triggering because you're like, have all these little people who are like, let me try and manipulate you because you're the sub.
Yeah.
And I was like, no. And I just really realized like I can barely figure out how to like raise my own kids. I can't like be raising 30 other people's children while
Right.
I'm trying to raise my like 3 traumatized special needs children.
Right.
Um so did these real little, like I got a job as a remote copywriter, editor,
Yeah.
worked at a church during the pandemic. Like I started before the pandemic, and then they fired me in the middle of the pandemic because I didn't have any childcare.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. It's hard. I know. I know.
Yeah, so this whole time have just been like, I need to be home working remotely because I need to do all these appointments for my kids.
Mm-hmm.
um and so like really on and off, like looked at VAs, like but was just not in a place where I could really like, because of all this trauma that I still haven't worked through, right? Like I, again, like you said, like couldn't put myself out there. My network is like non-existent. I have no friends. Have been back here, right? And so finally like started this awesome counselor that I have in August of 2020. And really from there, in October of 2021, did a it's a business coaching course called the Free Mama Movement. They have went to like a weekend event that they did called, I forget what it's called. Anyway,
I did that, like, I didn't do that one specifically, but I was in that group when I started my business, but I did the Virtual Savvies program, which
okay.
it's kind of like a direct competitor of the Free Mama, but their mission's all the same. It's like, but they have a course for specifically VA, starting your own VA business, but very
Yeah.
similar to what Lauren does
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So feel like I was finally in a place where I was like, okay, we're going to get this business started. Like, I'm going to work from home. We're actually going to get like off of public assistance. And then, but I'd always known that I wanted to like do something to help the survivor community, very specifically around employment, because I'd had such a hard time getting back in the workforce, right? Like we've been below the poverty line the entire time that we've been back. We were classified as homeless for a while. For like the first 3 years that we were back here, we were, you know, classified as homeless. Like, and so it's funny because I look back, it's like been less than a year, and I'm like, how exactly did that happen? But
like, again, hindsight 2020, because you've grown into this person after all of these experiences have pushed you.
Right.
Learn, and being an entrepreneur, I say, was like, it makes you face that trauma. It makes you.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Yeah. Like seriously, like being an entrepreneur is like half running a business and like half doing therapy, like
all the
because
time.
of your business. Yeah.
You're like, I have to break through this subconscious piece to make it to the next level. It's like weird. It's just like a weird thing. Like my friends that aren't entrepreneurs, they're like, I can't talk to them about it because it's like, oh, in corporate, you just level up. You're like, you don't have to do these things. But like to level up in business, like I say, like you have to have these, like either a personal breakdown, I feel like, or this big aha moment, or, you know, it's just an odd scenario.
Yeah, it really is. So I don't even like, I think that it was at that weekend that like the idea for the Juniatize Project just really like, I mean, it literally was one of those moments where you're just like, oh, like
right.
whole thing just sort of like came to me, right? I was like, this is what I want to do. This is exactly how I want it to work. And so like the original vision, which like that's still sort of my, you know, like grounding point, is that the Juniatize Project is a digital services agency that trains and hires domestic violence survivors in high demand online skills, right? And so I started out with WordPress because I had taken a WordPress course, like, and then I had the full stack coding course that I took, even though I didn't remember a ton of it. And I was like, okay, WordPress, like people need websites, people need whatever. So I have the skills. So I'll start with that. Start like putting myself out there after the Freedom to Freelance. That was what it was called. The Freedom to Freelance weekend with the Free Mama. Get 2 clients like pretty quickly, but I'm like, I still want to do this like agency thing.
Right.
And it makes the most sense to me in like the training aspect of it. Like, why am I going to reinvent the wheel in terms of women learning online skills? So I was like, well, I should partner with course creators who already have like WordPress courses, copywriting courses, social media management, like all those things. To see if they will like partner with us to donate their courses so that survivors can like take the course, learn the skill, and then like come work for us. And so last December, so December 2021, I reached out to Julia Taylor, who she's the founder of the Geek Pack program. It's the WordPress course that I took to learn WordPress. And it was like this crazy, like she called it Geekapalooza. It was like her little conference for WordPress. And she made an announcement that she wanted to start working with organizations that were trying to help women get back in the workforce. And I was like, hey. And so I emailed her and
Doing
I was
that.
literally like, there's nothing. This is just an idea. I don't have anything, but you said if you have any kind of idea, reach out to you. So here's my idea, you know.
Right.
And so we get on a call and she's like, so like, how soon do you envision like being able to do this agency? And I was like, well, probably like maybe the beginning of 2023, the end
Yeah.
of 2022, you know? And she's like, I think you can do it a lot faster than that if you like back into it. And I'm like, what do you mean by that?
Right.
And so she actually gave me 5 scholarships to her WordPress, to her Geek Pack course.
Right.
And I, in like 2 weeks, it's like, you know, mid-December, like right before the holidays, I managed to like round up 5 ladies who are like interested in going through this WordPress course as a cohort.
Yeah.
As I'm still like have these 2 WordPress clients that I'm just still trying to start making some money.
Yeah.
And so we start going through the course, and it's really been like, I talk all the time about like, this is totally like building the boat while we're sailing it.
Mm.
um and that I'm like, okay, thankfully the people who are on board and are still on board, like they're totally up for like, hey, we have no idea what we're doing, like what do you guys think about this, should we do this, should we do
Yeah.
that? So we are at the point now where 2 of the 5 ladies are they're 2 of my contractors, and
Okay.
so they're doing WordPress services. The other 3 ladies, like we kind of realized like the WordPress piece wasn't a good fit for them.
Mm-hmm.
The one lady's really interested in copywriting, so like I would love to actually find a copywriting course creator who would be willing to partner with us. um
Yeah. I will talk after the interview about, I have a couple connections that might be able to like help.
okay.
But I want to focus on this part first of like you're starting the agency, you're building them up, and which I love the concept of, for not only you to make money and have the flexibility, but uh, I mean, we have similar stories of virtual work. I think it's like, obviously it's the next big thing of a lot of corporations are also moving to contracting work. So I think it's
Right.
amazing that you're kind of like ahead of the curve and providing these women with the chance to get their life back on track.
Yeah. So thank you. So the original vision was like, so you take the course, you do whatever, you know, if you do the copywriting course, the WordPress course, whatever. And like I envision it sort of as 3 stages. Like you come in, we maybe do some like personality stuff, like maybe we do the Enneagram,
Yeah.
and like maybe some like vocational skills assessment sort of thing. Like, which of these do you think you'd be most interested in?
Right.
And then you start doing whatever the online courses to gain that skill. And then
Yeah.
inside of that, I would love for there to be a mental health component, that we are like partnering with trauma informed mental health providers that can, you know, donate their services, or if they always keep kind of one slot open for one of our ladies.
Yeah.
And so kind of this first phase is you're going through the course, doing your mental health work. And then like maybe when you get halfway through the course, then you become like an apprentice and you take on like 1 or 2 projects with a current employee or contractor,
Right.
so that you get some work under your belt and get some experience. And then when you feel like your skills are solid enough, then you can either come on board with us if you want to go start your own thing, if you want to try and go just get like a regular job with those skills. And like the original vision was that everybody would be employees. But then like had a conversation with my bookkeeper about like
Hard.
the reality of how much you actually have to make to have employees. And I was like, well, I guess everybody's starting as contractors.
It's just so much easier because Zach and I just went through, like, I have contractors in my business because I also don't have the need for full or part-time yet. Like, and I love the providing them with a little bit more flexibility, where he has like his business is construction. So their time frames are just like set in stone pretty much, it's just easier for him to have them as like contract or like actual W-2 employees. And there's like so much
Right.
fringe cost associated with it.
Right. Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think it's sort of shifted to like that really we maybe just always do contractors. I could see like as we grow kind of the core team becoming employees because we need like people
Yeah.
to run HR and operations and like all that stuff, but those people I could see eventually becoming employees.
Right.
But the survivors who are like actually providing the services to other businesses are contractors.
Yeah. It's a lot easier to do it that way, in my opinion,
Yes.
from my operational opinion. And there's also
Right.
a lot of fractional HR people if you do need that. In the sense, sorry, I'm like going to pull us off topic. I'm going to not. I'll let you keep going about we'll talk after because like I'll get sidetracked and that will take away from the focus of the episode. Of there are fractional HR people that also help because there's just like in the online business space. That's another good point for anyone listening. If you are in this situation, you don't know how to get started. There's so much. It's like the Wild West. Like you can call yourself anything. Like, and obviously you want to do it with integrity. Like you don't want to call yourself a coach without. Yeah, I mean that happens a lot where you're like, I'm a coach and they don't have any experiences. Like I personally get not offended, but I get uncomfortable when people are like cold DMing me and they're like, oh, I see you're a coach. I'm like, I am not a coach. I am a consultant. I do provide services, like, but I would never like want to be not that it's a bad thing, but it's like I don't feel like I can coach someone through. Like I don't have any certificate to say like, I'm a life coach or a mindset coach or like I just share my story. Like that's it. Like and I provide operational support. But I think it's so important for like the work that you're doing and letting them know like they have that support and it is hard to find work. And I just I think the statistic was I think it's like 67% of survivors or like people in that situation end up losing their job related to leaving the situation. And I know I felt like it was really stressful because in corporate you just have limited days, and then if you're the single parent you're like taking time off to take the kids to realize they're sick or they can't be in school or and like with the remote work I was like, because that was my problem because my work was I couldn't work from home because it was a product. I was working in a manufacturing company. It was government facility and they did not let us work from home even though we totally could if they would have gotten us the right like security equipment, like secure laptops, secure whatever, like the stuff I was doing I could have done from home and I wouldn't have had to take sick days just to sit on the couch with my child. Like parents need the flexibility and like the workforce is seeing that. They're slow to understand it, but that's why I'm like, I don't get why everyone's surprised by this great resignation. Like,
I know.
Sorry, that's another rabbit hole.
Well, I know, but I think you're right. I think especially single parents, right? That like you literally have to, I mean, you're the only person who can be there if your kid is sick, if they need to go to doctor's appointments, like all the things, right?
Well, now
and I mean, I think it's so interesting.
Like, if you're the default parent in a situation too, because of my work from home ability, I'm the default parent, which is fine. But like sometimes that's not like by choice. Right.
Exactly. And I mean, I think it's so interesting and so telling, right? That like the statistic is that 99% of survivors have experienced financial abuse.
Oh yeah.
It's right. And so you're like, we're already coming at this like from this vulnerable spot. And so I think like kind of the next piece of that journey was that I realized that well, I was doing this whole like social media campaign when we very first started, like kind of explaining the story of the Juniatize Project, and a pretty large faith-based advocacy organization reached out and asked about us doing their social media. And then now we're also doing a whole like web reorganization for them. And they have been like the perfect like first real agency client for us, because they also helped me realize that really like our target is advocacy organizations and shelters. Like, not that we're not willing to like do work for other businesses, especially if they are passionate about supporting survivors.
Yeah.
But she, like, in my conversation with her, she said, we'd much rather have you do it because you get it. Like, we don't have to explain anything to you because you just get it. And I was like, another one of those like, oh, moments where I was like, oh, this is totally like
Your
our
calling.
niche, right? Like, this is where we're at. And so they've been an amazing first client because they are like it literally is, and I need a word for it because it's like the opposite of a vicious cycle, right? It's like a really positive, like synergistic cycle where like by advocacy organizations and shelterings hiring survivors to do the work they need done, they're like fulfilling their own mission
Oh, yeah.
of like helping survivors,
It
right?
comes
And
full
so
circle.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's been a really cool, like, it's a really cool working experience with them, and a really cool partnership. Um, so, and I mean, they actually, so it's called the Peace Ministries. They are actually an amazing resource too, that if you are, if you're in, especially like the evangelical Christian community and you think that you might be in an abusive relationship, like, they do an excellent job of working with faith communities in terms of like helping survivors, and they also have a whole like church partnership program where they will like help your church learn about abuse and how to deal with it. And
that's really nice.
yeah,
Some people
yeah,
like, it's just like everyone just getting up to speed, and like that's the whole purpose of this platform, is just being able to talk about it. Like, people don't have a like place to talk about it and or share their stories.
right,
Like, I think more women, and like that's why I offer for women to share their stories anonymously if they would like, because it's hard to share, but like more people need to understand, like, this is what I went through, this is why it's not okay, and each scenario is going to be a little bit different. Like, yes, there are those books that like talk about everything, that we're like, how do you know, like, and we understand like there's these common threads, but everyone then gets in their own head and they're like, well, that's my situation's different, or like, and there is differences, but you don't have to go through life like feeling that is the normal, and that you have to put up with it, and then you can't talk about it. Like, people just shame you or make you feel bad. Like, there's an embarrassment component, I feel like, after, because like you are like, just so self-conscious, you can't trust your own decision making after that, all things that go with trauma. But it's just an interesting journey, and that's why I'm so glad you're sharing with us like how you got out, because that's also one of the pivotal, I feel like that's a pivotal piece, is getting out. Some people don't get to that point, but then how do you function after on a single income, because some people also just don't get child support, or don't want to, or like it's better for them to not get the child support, because going back to the financial abuse, it could be like a form of control for them. So you might be safer to not get the child support and just have to figure it out on your own, even though that it's hard too. Like, you're talking about, there's not a lot of job opportunities, or there weren't. And I'm glad to see like a lot of people are trying to make that effort into having or creating the job opportunities, especially with remote work being what it is.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, so we have this big client so far. And then we've gotten real recently, like within the last month, we've gotten kind of all these little project like
Yeah,
inquiries, which is really exciting. Like to the point where we're actually talking to a fourth survivor who is also doing WordPress about bringing her on
that would
to
be
do some
amazing.
more contract work. So it's just really like I have moments where I'm like, what is happening? Like that's like become the joke, like the like theme of the Juniatize project is what is happening.
I mean,
Because
your
I'm just
story
like, how did
inspired
this?
me and helped me with my aha like moment of like, how do I help people and still like run my business in a sense? Because for so long it was I didn't know how to make the two mesh.
Right. Well, and so I think that like, and so the whole idea of the public benefit corporation, and like, so for our
Mhm.
listeners, that we are, I incorporated as a public benefit corporation. So it is a for profit business that has either a social or an environmental mission behind it.
Right,
And that in regular for profit businesses, like your bottom line and how much money you make is just the thing that is driving your business.
right.
I chose to become a public benefit corporation because your mission is what drives the business. And so if you need to make decisions that affect your bottom line, you are able to make those. And so
Yeah.
like Patagonia is one, Ben and Jerry's is one. And so like Patagonia is a really interesting example because their whole thing is environmental sustainability. And like they have an entire campaign about don't buy our clothes. And you're
I didn't
like,
see that. I
yeah,
did not
like
see
you're a
that.
clothing company that tells people not to buy your clothes. Like, and
Interesting.
so they have all these like swap meets that you can go to like all over the country that you can like, and so it's just a really like I feel like Patagonia is this really fascinating example of how a public benefit corporation is saying that their environmental mission is like clothing sustainability because it impacts the environment so much.
That is a big
And they're,
topic right now.
yeah, and like they're willing to have this campaign that says don't buy our clothes.
Yeah.
You're like, but it totally works, right? Like they're a really well-known, respected company. Like, so I did. That's part of that is why I chose to become a public benefit corporation because I wanted it really is like a hybrid of a nonprofit and a for-profit business. And
Well, I heard
like
from talking to
in
someone,
Colorado,
sorry, not to cut you off. I
no,
heard
you're
from
fine.
someone, and maybe you know more. So, like, if you've looked into the nonprofit, like, you have to have a company almost funding the nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like that makes it doubly hard to start a nonprofit.
Right. Right. Well, and the other reason I chose to do a PBC was because in this whole process, I talked to two different nonprofit founders, and they were both like, there's like just sort of at the core of nonprofits, there's this sort of like toxic dysfunctionalness that like you just sort of can't avoid.
Okay.
And both of them were like, yeah, if I had it to do over again, I might not have incorporated as a nonprofit. Like I might have figured out a different way to do it. And I was like, both of them said that like independent of each other. And it's like, okay, I don't want to be a nonprofit.
That's actually really good to know.
Yeah. And then I don't even remember how I came across public benefit corporations, but like as soon as I found it, I was like, that is what we're doing.
Right, and that's not talked
Um,
about at all. Like, I never heard of it until you and I had had our first initial connection call, and I was like,
yeah.
"I wish I would have known about this so much, like, I wish I would have known sooner."
Right. Well, and I mean, they're really fairly new. I would say like PBCs have really started within the last 10 years, I want to say, maybe
Yeah,
15. And like we were talking about before, that there's only 36 states that you can incorporate as
right,
a public benefit corporation.
right.
So it's not everywhere yet, but it's definitely, I mean, it's a really, really cool business model.
I know, I love it. I think it's amazing business model because it allows you, like you said, to put your mission first and not the dollar amount. Because sometimes you do have to be put in that situation because you don't want to, because everyone talks about like, oh, you have to be for profit and you have to charge so much, especially if you are someone who's listening, who's familiar with the online space. Everyone's going to tell you to charge, like raise your prices. It's like always raise your prices, but they don't consider like you have to also price yourself for the market in a sense. Like I come from a very business background and that's what my degree was in. That's what I did in corporate. Like, and so that's where I struggle with some of the things that are said online in the online space. Like I get where they're coming from, but there's also, if you're doing a service or selling a product or, you know, running your agency like you are, and it's service based, so you still have to consider like what is the market value for this product. Like they don't like I sometimes just don't agree with how people try to do pricing structures online. That's all I'm gonna say there.
Yeah, well, you know, and I think we're finding like we're learning a lot in that area, right? About pricing and about contractors. And so it's been like, I feel like it's this like crazy adventure that I'm really, really thankful that I have these 3 other ladies who are willing to like do it with me.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that, I mean, I'm very aware that I'm like, even in my leadership, I'm a very like cooperative leader. Like I'm just not going to unilaterally make all these decisions. Like I'm like, okay, what do you guys think about this? Like this impacts you too. Like I want to get feedback. And so it really has been this amazing opportunity to like rebuild some community. And like there are moments where I'm like, I literally have no idea what we're doing, but we're just gonna like keep doing it and it's working. So it's exciting to, and I mean, I think that there's also this piece of like, it's so exciting to see these women like find their self-confidence again, right? That like when we started with this client, our like main WordPress lady, I was like, okay, so how about like you run the meeting with this company? And she was like, I don't think I've ever run a meeting before. And then she was like, well, wait a minute, like I've run Bible studies and stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, see, like you've totally run meetings. And we got up and she was like, thank you for making me do that. Like I was terrified, but it really made me realize how I can do a lot more than I think I can.
That's
and I was
amazing.
Like, yeah, you totally can. Like,
oh my gosh. You got to like jot some of these internal stories down for when you're hiring or like going out and promoting of just like, these are the transformations that we've been able to create. Like just to get people, I mean, sure, people, if they just hear about it and they're like, oh my God, you're going to hire me because I'm a survivor, like you can help me. That makes it, but I just feel like that's such good social proof of what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is an amazing experience to like be building this thing and to actually be able to pay people, right? That like the first time I actually got to like pay these 3 ladies, I was like, oh my gosh, I think this might be like the most exciting thing I've ever done, you know? Like
that's like hard because not hard, it's a great thing, but it's like that's something a lot of people, especially with clients I work with, they don't always like some people dread paying people, and it shouldn't be like that.
yeah.
I was trying to find my words.
Not a problem that I have. Like every time I get a pay, I'm like, yes, this is so awesome. Like
right. I love that. It's important to have people who are building. So for any of the viewers listening, like there are alternative ways to one, heal and find your strength, and you can overcome it no matter what the situation is. And then there are opportunities to earn an income, even if you are a single parent. I feel like those are like the
Absolutely.
three biggest takeaways, especially from your story and your journey in the Juniatize Project. Where, if anybody who's watching who wants to follow you, connect, or talk about business opportunities, connect.
Yeah, so we are on Facebook. Junia Judson. My Facebook is a little weird because I'm in the middle of changing my name. So
Okay.
my Facebook is Jen Jones, or is Junia Judson Jen Jones. It's like this big long thing.
Okay.
And there's also the Juniatize Project. We have a Facebook page.
Perfect.
And then on Instagram, it's what are we? I should know this. On Instagram, I think it's, and I can like get that for
We'll
you.
link it in
Notes,
the
but
show notes below.
yeah.
We'll link the website, your website, the Facebook page. Is there anything else you would like to share? One last final thought or anything you'd like to share with our audience that as like a wrap up? Last thought.
Yeah.
What do you want to end on?
I mean, I think just that, like, especially for survivors, like, there it gets better, right? And that, like, I even just a year ago couldn't have even imagined that we would be where we are now.
Yes.
And that, like, just because you can't imagine it any other way doesn't mean that it can't be different. And to like let yourself start like dreaming again, right? And to start like imagining what life could be like or how you want your life to be, because I think we like shut down that piece of ourselves because it's just too hard.
Right.
And that really, I think what really catapulted this whole thing was me letting myself imagine it being different and imagining being in a different place.
Yeah.
So, and it was hard.
Not easy. It is not. I think those are great words of advice and wisdom, because we do forget sometimes to just where we are doesn't have to be where we have to stay. So I think that,
Right.
and just being able to dream sometimes takes a lot, even as adults, like not just survivors in general, but adults. We're just so trained to think one way or not really open up our mind to what is actually possible.
Right. And I would also say, like, along with that, like, if you think that you are in an abusive relationship or you are, like, reach out for help, even if it's just, if any of these resources are in the show notes, like, there is help out there.
Yeah.
And you're not alone.
And if you feel comfortable reaching out to one of us, I always say my inbox is always open. If I'm not the right person, I will find you the right person. So feel free to reach out.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Junia. And thank you for joining us, sharing your story and being vulnerable, and for all the amazing work you're doing for survivors as well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was great talking with you.